Good morning, everybody. It's kind of amazing to see so many people so wide awake on a Saturday morning. I have literally... Okay, you're shaking your head. But, all right, that's cool. I'm glad you're admitting that because I'm not a morning person, and I was starting to feel a little bit ashamed about that because you all look so sparky. But I've literally only seen one person yawning, and it's really amazing. You all seem so wide awake. What kind of coffee are you drinking? I need to know. All right, I'm going to be talking to you today about the elephant and the Dassie. Let's start by having a look through a fun little family photo album. Just to the people at the back over there, I will not be offended if you turn and look at the slides on that screen. I know they are a bit clearer, so if you're looking that way, I'm not going to think that it's because you don't want to stare at me. I get it. Okay, that's Uncle Walter and Auntie Mildred. How many of you knew that the Dassie was the African elephant's closest living relative? Hands up. Okay, good. I win the bet with my husband because he told me that like no one was going to know that. And I said, come on, we all went to school. At least 50% of the people were going to know. And you did. Great. But this is what people's faces often look like when you tell them this. I love to tell my American friends this fact and get this expression in return. Because it is kind of an amazing fact, right? The Dassie and the elephant. I mean, huh? The Dassie looks like a little bunny without ears. And the elephant is kind of big. They don't look anything alike. But they are related. If you go to a website called World Wild Web with 2 B's, .tumblr.com, you will learn a slightly different story. And the story goes like this. In years gone by, the elephants and Dassies used to live together quite happily in the forests of sub-Saharan Africa, cohabiting as family, of course, because that's what they were. So the whole family lived together. But then in the 1960s, some unfortunate things began to happen. There were trampling incidents, some unfortunate grandfather-grandson trampling incidents and auntie-niece trampling incidents. And so the Dassies realized that the only solution was for them to sadly move out of the forests because it wasn't safe for them to be living with their family, the elephants, in the forest. So they had to move on out. And they moved to the mountains. Because the mountains, of course, are impossible terrain for elephants. And the story on worldwildweb.tumblr.com goes that today, the elephants and the Dassies only come together for their family reunions, where the Dassies make themselves visible by tying helium balloons around their waists. So they don't get trampled anymore. You can go to worldwildweb.tumblr.com for more wonderful animal stories like this, brought to you by a team of content strategists. All right, but let's return to the story, the other truth, as I'll call it, about the elephants and the Dassies, because they are related, which is really weird. Why are they related? As I said, the Dassie is kind of like a bunny without ears, and the elephant is a really big, wrinkly thing with enormous feet and very big ears and tusks and a trunk and stuff, and they don't look anything alike. So how do we explain this? Well, the explanation lies in the fact that they apparently had, it's a little bit fuzzy. I did some research, it's a bit fuzzy, and they don't seem to, all the scientists don't quite agree. But they apparently had a common ancestor. Many, many millions of years ago, there was actually a common ancestor. I don't think it looked like this. I got this picture from a website called uncyclopedia.com, which sounds a little dodgy. So I'm not sure. But anyway, that's the only thing I could find. And they had this common ancestor. And the thing is that this ancestor evolved in slightly different ways, down 2 different routes. So the Dassie evolved in one direction, and the elephant evolved in a different direction. And that's how we ended up with these 2 completely different looking creatures that actually surprisingly do still share some biological characteristics. You can go and read up all about it, but they actually share some sort of invisible biological characteristics still. And in the words of the best band, my favorite musicians in the entire world, that's evolution, baby. So what does this have to do with us? Firstly, let me introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm an independent content strategy consultant. That's not my real hair in that picture. I'm actually wearing a moose hat because I was in Minnesota, and in Minnesota, that's what you do. So I just want to give you some background so that you can understand where I come from and what my own evolution was. I studied English and linguistics, but I also studied some computer science and information systems and human-computer interaction as well. This is way back, like 20 years ago, so who remembers COBOL? Yay! Wasn't that fun? Yes, I did some COBOL. But from there, so I did a BA degree. From there, I started doing copywriting. And it was mostly print work. That slowly evolved into web writing, which I enjoyed far more. But I was still kind of doing copywriting. That was my title. I was a copywriter. So it was really marketing. Slowly, my web writing became a little bit more IA as well. I did a little bit of information architecture because, well, my clients needed that. Eventually, that information architecture, copywriting for the web kind of thing became content strategy. And I was a content strategist first as the owner of a small agency, and then I went to a solo consultancy. I ran Content Strategy Forum in Cape Town in 2012. So we brought in some international speakers and so on. Some of them were UX people, mostly content focused though. And then I started speaking. And the reason I'm telling you this is just to give you an idea that I've spoken at content strategy conferences, but I've also spoken at a few UX conferences. So IA Summit and Midwest UX, for example. So there's kind of a little bit of fuzziness around what I've done. Our work is a strange beast. It's a strange, fuzzy beast. In years gone by, work used to be a lot simpler. People used to do things that were quite clear-cut. Work was fairly tangible. It had edges. It was pretty easy to define what you did. Your work started somewhere and it ended somewhere. There was less scope creep. Because if you worked in a sausage factory like those people do, you had to make a certain amount of sausage each day, and that didn't change. And you knew how much time it was going to take you to make that sausage, and you knew how much meat you needed to make the sausage, and you knew how much space you needed to make the sausage, and you knew all those things before you started, and it didn't change. People had jobs that were relatively simple to define, like butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. But what about us? What do? We do things like that. Whoa. Usability practitioner, product designer, front-end developer, web analyst. What do those things mean? And actually, it's a little bit more like that, isn't it? Because the edges are really blurry and they all sort of feed into one another. And there's no real definition around those things. Phil touched on that yesterday when he spoke about defining UX. And there's this constant discussion online about what is UX and how do we define it and are we defining it correctly? And that's because it's really hard to define these things because there are no clear edges. There are a lot of overlaps. There's a thing that I can't get away from that I call a digital irony. And here's how it goes. So there's a definition of digital. Digital is of signals or data expressed as series of the digits 0 and 1. Digital is discrete. It's on or off. It's unambiguous. Positive or negative. Analog, on the other hand, continuously variable physical quantity. Analog has the quality of being continuous. It's on a spectrum. It's amorphous. So there's the irony. Which one of those sounds more like digital design and UX work? I don't know about you, but I can tell you which one sounds more like my work. And it's not discrete, on or off, positive or negative, unambiguous. It's continuous. It's on a spectrum. It's amorphous. It's fuzzy. It's hard to define. It doesn't begin and end clearly. So the irony is that the advent of digital, this thing that's all about ones and zeros and being on and off, has actually produced fuzziness and overlap in our work. Disciplines now overlap in surprising ways, thanks to digital evolution. So I was doing a few courses recently on Coursera. I was doing 3 courses at the same time because I'm really dumb and I plan poorly, and I keep telling myself lies about how much stuff I can actually get done at any one time. So I was doing these 3 courses at the same time: social psychology, introduction to communication science, and metadata. And sometimes I like to talk about the things that I'm learning because I think Phil mentioned this yesterday as well. It helps me to really understand it better. So I'll often talk to my husband, poor guy, tell him a lot of the things that I'm learning about. And I would find myself telling him something and then suddenly realize I'd want to tell him which course I'd learned it in, and I'd suddenly realize I had no idea which course I'd learned this in because they were all blurring into one. And then I began to realize that actually some of the things I'd learned in more than one course, because there were so many overlaps between these different disciplines. And the interesting thing is that all 3 of those courses I was doing for my work, I was actually doing them because they all have relevance to the work that I do. Even though you would not necessarily think that social psychology is relevant for a content strategist, but it absolutely is. So is metadata, so is communication science. 3 distinct disciplines that all have relevance and that all overlap in certain ways and are all useful in their overlaps. In the metadata course, I learned about something called the Pandora Music Genome Project. Has anybody here heard of that? Okay, a couple of people. So what Pandora, the internet radio station, what they're attempting to do is, and they've been working on this for a few years already, is to tag and map the world's music, all of it. But in very interesting ways. They're really trying to do this in a very complex sort of way. So more than just saying what genre is this piece of music, they're actually looking at things like tempo and what instruments are represented and how those instruments are played and what the pitch is and that kind of thing. So they're really, really, really taking this to a very complex level. And what they've had to do to enable them to do this and to actually develop this metadata is they've brought in musicians, people who are absolute experts in the field of musicology. They've brought these people in to help them to determine what these characteristics and features should be. So this means that they have these developers and metadata experts working alongside musicians to actually develop this digital repository of information. So that means that in this particular project, the librarian is related to the computer programmer, and they're both related to the rock musician. Whoa. Let's talk a little bit about teams. It's very unlikely that any of you work in a team that looks like that, because that's quite large. It's more likely that your team might look a little bit like that. You might have an interaction designer, a UI designer, web developer, somebody with a fairly generic title of web developer, community manager who's probably responsible for writing all the content, including all the social media stuff, but also all the other content, and an SEO specialist, because particularly in South Africa, we've always spent money on SEO. So you may have a team like that. Your team might be very UX heavy. You may have a team that looks a bit more like this: front-end developer, UI designer, interaction designer, user researcher, and product manager. So there's no real content people in that team, but it's very, very strong on user research. If you work in a more corporate environment or a larger organization, you might have something that looks a little more technical. So information architect, technical architect, usability specialist, business analyst, and so on. This is a slightly more balanced kind of team. The whole thing here, though, is that there is no one way that a team is composed these days. Teams are incredibly varied. Digital teams are becoming increasingly varied. If you look at About Us pages of agencies and digital teams, there is no single way that these teams are structured. There is a huge amount of flexibility and variation in teams and in job titles. And what that means is that through your career, you are very likely to spend time alongside a variety of different roles in different teams. In all the teams that you move from and to, as you move from organization to organization and team to team, you're going to get to spend time alongside a lot of different people, which is great because it means that you get to pick up a lot of different tools and techniques from them. But it also means that you might need to fill more roles because those teams, as you saw in some of those previous slides, some of those teams had some big gaps in them. And those gaps need to be filled. Somebody has to be aware of them and has to pick up the slack. So that means that we need to start reading more widely. We need to begin to fill in our knowledge. We can't just take on a single role and be satisfied with staying where we are. Broader knowledge means that we're going to have greater team understanding. As soon as you start to broaden your knowledge, you will actually be able to collaborate better with the people that are in your team, whatever their roles are. All right, let's talk a little bit about lenses and roles. So I really believe that lenses at this point are more important to us than roles. It doesn't matter so much what you call yourself. I've worked on projects as a content strategist where I've had to do UX work, where I've had to do things like creating customer journey maps, which for me is not a typical content strategy role. I've done customer interviews and things like that, which are, again, not usual content strategy roles. But the thing is that whatever work I do, I come to it with a content strategist's lens, because that's what I think about. I think about content. So the work that I do, I come to with that lens. Now, what does a lens do for you? Your lens affects what you notice and how you see the world. Your lens is what you're passionate about. It's the thing that you're interested in, the thing that you care about. Your lens might be accessibility. It might be interaction. It could be any number of things. It could be broad. It could be narrow. But what your lens is the thing that's going to make you notice certain things. So let's take this photo. Unfortunately, it's not going to show up very well on here. You might see it better on that other screen. I ran this photo through a simulator for color blindness to see what different people with different types of color blindness would see. So that's the ordinary photo. In the version that I can see on my screen, and probably the people there, this tree in the front is really pink and it stands out quite nicely. Everything's green and everything's quite nicely in balance. In that version, most of the things are quite brown. So what starts to stand out is a few white flowers in the front, and the pathway stands out really well, and the man walking on the pathway just jumps out at you. And suddenly you see different things that you didn't see before because of a different lens, right? That's a different version. Again, you're probably not going to see it very clearly on here, but the pink tree suddenly just jumps out and bursts into your field of vision because of applying a different lens. And that's what lenses are about. They put different things into prominence for us. They make us notice different things. So it's much more important that when you're in a team, you come to that team with your lens rather than being particularly stubborn about what your role is. Bring your lens, bring your approach, because that's what you have to add. This is my Twitter bio, and sure, I said in there that I have a content strategist's heart because it happened to fit nice and neatly into the approach that I was taking for my bio. But also, it's really true. I didn't specifically want to say I am a content strategist because I have a content strategist's heart. This is my approach to things. I think about everything like a content strategist. I see things from a content strategy perspective. When I'm sitting in a meeting, the things that I'm thinking about, even though I'm interested in the entire project, I'm thinking about content. I'm noticing content gaps. That's what I'm considering. That is my lens. Now, what is one of the benefits of us having these different lenses that we can apply to our work? Well, one of the benefits is that we can actually use each other's tools. Because if we have different tools, and then we take that tool and we apply a different lens to it, we can reapply the tool and use it in a different way. So, for example, content strategists have started to use customer journey maps, which is a UX tool, right, for discovering content gaps. We've taken a tool that user researchers have been using and UX designers have been using, and we've reapplied it in a slightly different way using our lens, which is saying, well, we're thinking about content. So we're going to look at content and how does content relate to this? And we've reapplied it and we've started to use it for finding content gaps. Another example is using user interviews. This is a talk that I did last year. I had done a project where I had been asked to do some customer interviews, and it was for a user experience project. There was no content strategy element to it, But I realized while I was doing these customer interviews that there was a whole lot of stuff here that was actually really useful for content strategists that we were not thinking about. And that I could actually take this tool that UX people were already using, that user researchers were using, and could reapply it, find some slightly different angles, take my lens, apply that, and reuse it for content strategists. Within our teams, we need to care more about one another's work. Caring more about one another's work doesn't necessarily mean doing it. It means respecting it, and it means noticing that it needs to be done. It means noticing that there are gaps that need to be filled. So when you realize that your client or the organization has not, for example, I'm going to go back to content, has not made allowance for creating content anywhere in the process, and there is nobody on the team to do content, caring about the work doesn't mean that you have to jump in and write the content yourself, but it does mean that you have to put your hand up and say, there is a gap here and we need to actually do something about this. It means that you need to make the client or the project manager aware of the fact that there's a gap. That's what caring about the work means. It means respecting other people in your team, or not in your team perhaps people that you've worked with previously, other roles, other disciplines, respecting the work and the value that they can bring to projects. Let's move on and talk about relationships within organizations. Verticals in organizations are dissolving. Traditionally, organizations have looked like that. They've had very, very strong verticals, right? Sales and marketing, finance, IT, HR, legal, operations. Very clear verticals. This is a diagram that was created by a content strategist, Richard Ingram. What he did was he took a tool and identified content that was being accessed by various people in an organization across all the silos, across all the verticals. Content that was being accessed by people in the CMS over a period of time, and identified those pieces of content and where those people were, and then mapped it out like this. What it looked like on the organization chart was a little bit like that. So that's how the content was flowing through the organization, single pieces of content. Content doesn't live in a silo, right? It doesn't live in one vertical. Verticals are dissolving within organizations. It's no longer possible for organizations to work in these highly structured verticals as they always have done. Digital is eroding those silos. We're going to look at the example of content. It used to belong exclusively to the marketing department, and we called it copywriting. Okay, and I know this well because it's what I used to do. I was a copywriter. That is perhaps one of the lamest pieces of copywriting I've ever seen, and I've seen some really lame copywriting in my time. I have no idea what is going on there. You mean you didn't know we carry a complete selection of Passover foods? I don't know if that's a joke or what. I'm lost. So that's what content was, right, in the past. It was copywriting, and that was it. That's what we called it. But here's the thing. It's becoming apparent that content actually stretches across an organization. It's a business asset that stretches all the way across an organization, right across all those verticals, across all those silos. There are a few examples of the kinds of content that might exist. So we've got marketing copy, which we all know about, right? We know about brochures and we know about those kind of horrible ads. But finance might have forms. That's content. IT might have interface copy in some of the software that they're creating. HR has intranet content, knowledge management, knowledge bases, that kind of thing. Legal could have things like terms of service or contracts. Operations, one example would be call center scripts. So that's content that stretches all the way across an organization. And many of those things are customer facing. They're not internal. Some of them are, but many of them are customer facing. And they need to be presented as one unified messaging architecture to your customers. All right, but that's content. Let's move out a few paces to something that might be a little more relevant to those of you who don't work with content specifically. Let's look at a website. as a whole. Websites are not just marketing tools anymore. Way back when companies were first getting onto the web, when the kind of the advent of the commercial web, they set up brochure sites. That's what we called them. We still call them that if that's what they have, brochure sites, right? Because that's what they were. They were marketing brochures. They just had a bunch of marketing information. They're not that simple anymore. This is the REI website, which is an outdoor company in the US, kind of like Cape Union Mart, but bigger. Their website is a point of sale because they sell their products. It's a travel agency. They actually run tours. So they're a travel agency. They have an outdoor club that they're running from their website, an advice column. It's a customer care platform. It's a financial management platform. They actually have credit cards and things like that that you can apply for and manage from this website. And there are legal contracts on this site. There are stacks of terms of service and privacy policies and a whole bunch of other things that they have. And that's just a few things. So it's not a marketing platform alone anymore. It's a whole lot of other things, and there is no way that this website can be owned entirely by the marketing department. It has to be something that is cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary. It has to run across verticals and across silos. Investing online is great until I want to talk. Here's the thing. It's no longer about the structure of your organization. Now it's about your customer's cross-channel journey. And that is why verticals are eroding. Because the focus has moved away from how your organization is structured and towards what your customer sees, what the user sees, and how the user interacts with your organization. And they don't care how your organization is structured. They don't want to know. They don't want to know which department created this page or which department wrote this piece of content. They want to deal with you across channels. So every interaction and every channel needs to reflect that. And that is why user experience, content strategy, all of these things cannot be confined to one department. So silos are becoming permeable, and it's our job to keep making those holes, building doors and building windows and building bridges between silos in organizations. In the organizations that we work with, in our client organizations, we have to make sure that our clients and our organizations understand this, because otherwise the things that we build are not going to be sustainable. We're going to walk away and we're going to watch those projects crash and burn. Let's talk quickly about how we see the people that we work with, whether you're internal or whether you're a consultant or an agency. It's really important to see the stakeholders, and by that I mean the people that you're interviewing, the people that you're talking to, the ones you're getting information from to build whatever the product or site is that you're building, as collaborators. Because again, if you don't bring them along on this journey and make them part of it, whatever you build won't be sustainable because they don't own it. They don't feel like it's theirs. We need to move towards facilitating, bringing people along with us, and saying no to the big reveal. We need to move away from the idea of walking away, building something, and coming back and saying, look what this wonderful thing is that I built. We need to take the hands of the people that we're building for and build it with them. They need to be there every step of the way. We have to really, really, really bring people along on the journey with us. And people from across the organization, that's the really important thing to take away from this, is that it's not just the design team, it's people from across the organization, the people who are going to be using and updating and managing the site or product or whatever it is that you're busy working on. They need to come along on this journey with you. Sarah Wachter-Betcher is content strategy consultant and also editor-in-chief at A List Apart. And she put this slide into a recent presentation of hers, which I really recommend finding. It's about content again, but I think there's a lot in there for anybody working with client organizations about this idea of facilitating. She and I have been talking recently a lot about the idea of facilitating rather than saving and rescuing people, rather than coming in and trying to be a superhero, actually helping and facilitating and walking along with people. And this idea of finding common ground before you start doing anything is so important. Yes, common ground before content, but also common ground before building, common ground before design. Sit down and talk about what it is that you're trying to achieve. What are the business objectives? What are our actual messages that we're trying to get out? What are we actually doing? Why are we doing it? And again, the point here is that this is across the organization. This involves people from across the organization. You have to build relationships with all your stakeholders from across the organization. Let's move on and talk about the local community and relationships there. Sharing our toys. A lot of large global companies have started to share their tools and their methodologies and their processes very openly in the last few years, like NPR, New York Times, The Guardian in the UK, and quite a lot of others, have started to be really, really open about what they're doing and how they're doing it. They've started to share their challenges. They've shared things like the CMS platforms that they're building, and how they're doing it, and why, and what the thinking is, and so on. And they're being incredibly open about these things. Melody Joy Kramer is somebody who is in digital strategy at NPR, and she posted this the other day. Said, a lot of people seem astonished that we share all of our stuff. It would be less astonishing if you shared your stuff. Share your stuff. And I think we really need more of that right here in South Africa. We need more sharing across organizations. We need organizations to be more open in allowing their staff, their employees, to actually share their tools and their methodologies and their processes. I've been so amazed at going to conferences and hearing people from Facebook and people from MailChimp and large companies like that talking openly, really, really openly about the work that they've been doing and really behind the scenes stuff. And, you know, this is not, their bosses know that they're doing this. They're not having to sneak around and do it. It's completely accepted and expected. There's this generosity of spirit in sharing things because really it just makes it better for everybody. We're all building on what everybody else is doing. A community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. And that's what we need to build here in Cape Town. We need to build a community of practice, a really strong community of practice around user experience. These guys have done a good job in starting the UX Craft Meetup. And if you haven't joined, really, I encourage you to join that and start getting involved. Attend meetups, share, speak. Don't arrive at a meetup of any kind and just expect to be entertained. Arrive willing to share. Arrive willing to actually give something. Offer to speak if you have something, no matter how small. You might think that you have nothing to share. Everybody starts there, by the way. Everybody. Every speaker that you see on the international speaking circuit, they've all been there. They've all thought they had no stories to tell and nothing to share. But you probably do, no matter how small it is. And come willing to actually share your struggles and willing to share your challenges. You don't have to have all the answers. But develop a willingness to actually talk about the things that you're doing and the things that you're learning. But that's not all. It's not just about meetups. There's more. There are more ways that we can actually build a community of practice. You can grab coffee with another person who shares your job role. Grab coffee with someone who has a different job role to you and swap notes. Find out what they're doing. Learn a little bit more about what it is that they do. Speak to a product manager. Find out what their job's like. Chat with some other UX people on Skype. Start a Slack group with a bunch of UX friends to talk about work. Get a little dinner group together to chat about a niche topic. You know, it doesn't always have to be a meetup where there's somebody standing in front giving a presentation. Sometimes it can just be 6 people sitting around a table talking about something that they've battled with. People from different organizations. So I'm not talking about colleagues who all work together all day. I'm talking about people from different organizations coming together to share their challenges. Organize a weekend away to talk shop. This is something that I've had experience of. If you want to know more about how to do this, it is a really fantastically helpful experience. You can come and ask me. I can send you some resources. UXers without borders. I know. We live really far away from everything. really far away, 1 bajillion miles away from everybody else. But that's the entrance to the World Wide Web, if you can't read it on the slide. There is the internet. We don't need to isolate ourselves. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's because of our history, having been isolated, or because of where we are geographically, but we seem to have some kind of group personality that causes us to, we kind of have this thing of, we can do this on our own. We have special problems here. We're unique, and we need to hang together. Nobody else understands us. We don't need to do that. There's a whole world out there, and they're surprisingly a lot like us, actually. A lot like us. I really don't think there's much reason for us to lag behind anymore. We have some technological challenges still, sure. I mean, our internet is still kind of slow. But there are not a lot of reasons. We don't need to lag behind in our thinking, certainly. There is no reason for us to lag behind in the ideas that we have, because they're all right out there on the internet. We can read all the same blogs, the same websites that everybody else is reading. We can participate in the same conversations. There's absolutely no reason for us to be 5 years behind or 3 years behind or whatever we are right now. Culture isn't bound by geography. So I did mention earlier that my favorite band, I mean the best band, it's not just that they're my favorite band, but they are like actually the best band in the whole world ever in the universe is Pearl Jam. So that was at a Pearl Jam concert in Berlin earlier this year. And the point of this is that culture is not necessarily about the place you were born in. It is about that. But you can have more than one culture. You can find culture in multiple places. Culture is about a shared sense of belonging. And I had a shared sense of belonging in that arena in Berlin because I share something with those people. I mean, because we all know who the best band in the universe is, obviously, so that's what we share. But it's about that. And the point of that is that you can go somewhere else in the world and realize that you actually share culture with people. I think sometimes I've observed South Africans going to conferences overseas like South by Southwest, and they tend to stick together, it seems. And I'm not sure why that is, because you can absolutely share a culture with people who are not from here, because you share an interest with them, you share a passion with them. I mean, there are forums dedicated to all kinds of weird niche cultures and passions. Those are shared cultures. Challenges and ideas are universal. As I said, we tend to think that we're special and our problems are all special. And sure, in Africa, we do have some special perspectives on things. There, some things are a little different. But overall, the general issues that are occupying people and that are occupying people's thoughts and minds, they're the same the world over. We just need to apply them a little bit differently where we need to. But we can learn a lot. And you know what? They can learn a lot from us too. It works both ways. So what can you do? Read widely. Books, magazine websites, blogs, slide decks. Slide decks, this is a massively forgotten resource. Go on to SlideShare and read slide decks. There is so much information out there that you can pick up, and you'll find some really interesting people that way. Twitter feeds. So here's a reading list. My slides will be up on SlideShare, by the way, so you do not need to write these down. But there's just a starter list of reading for you, kind of a broad suggestion list of blogs and websites that you can go to and go and read. One of them is not actually for reading, it's a podcast. I took a little liberty with the word reading. But actually, you can read it because they have full transcripts of every podcast as well. And that's the Responsive Web Design podcast, which is a pretty new one by Karen McGrain and Ethan Marcotte. So I really recommend all of these. So much information out there. And this is how you become part of the global conversation on user experience, instead of just staying in the little filter bubble that we have here. Here are a few people that you could follow on Twitter. Again, a really tiny sample, but this is going to give you some insight into what's going on out there. If you're not following these people, get on that. One important thing to remember, don't follow these people and expect to get a bunch of amazing links every single day, because they're human beings. They're just like you and me. They don't just tweet a bunch of links. They're people. They tweet about their lives. And that's what's important. Don't follow them just to get all the UX goodies. Follow them to become part of the conversation. I know that's an old, hackneyed, horrible marketing phrase, and I shudder to hear myself saying it. But I do kind of mean it in this case. Become part of that conversation. Secondly, travel. I know traveling is expensive. However, I see a lot of people going on holiday. And I see people going on holiday overseas sometimes. And then I think to myself, you know what? If you had just waited 2 months, you could have combined that lovely 2-week trip that you're taking to London with a conference. And people don't do this, and I don't understand why. So I really want to encourage you to think about that, because it's possibly the single biggest thing that has made a change for me. If you're going to be traveling anyway, have a look and see what conferences are happening. There are so many amazing user experience and web conferences all over the world, all over Europe, the US, the UK, everywhere, Australia, New Zealand. Have a look and see what's happening in the part of the world that you want to go to, and see if you can perhaps just schedule your trip to coincide with that conference. Tack it on at the end or the beginning and win. In December 2009, this was a comment that I left on a blog post that Rachel Levenger had written on the Scattergather blog, which is the Razorfish blog. And she wrote a blog post about a conference that was coming up in Paris, Content Strategy Forum, which was the very first Content Strategy Forum. And I said, I've been agonizing over this for weeks now, but you've twisted my arm. Basically, I went on and to say that I was going to go. This was just a couple of weeks before this was December. I was going to go, even if it meant that I had to sell my cats into slavery. But I had made up my mind I was going to go. And it was hard for me. I mean, I really had to, it was costly, but I decided that this was something I was going to do because I wanted to meet these people. I'd been following them on Twitter for ages. They were my heroes. They were my content strategy heroes, and I wanted to meet them. So in April 2010, I went to Paris on my own, and I was a little bit scared, to be honest. I remember, actually, my husband dropped me at the airport, and I almost burst into tears. And I thought, what on earth are you doing? You don't speak French. You're going to Paris. You're traveling overseas for the first time on my own. And I didn't know what I was doing. But it was the best decision I have ever made. It literally changed my life. Literally, I was thinking about this recently, and I can trace so many career opportunities and changes back to that single decision to travel to a conference, because I met people, I made connections with people that I would never have met otherwise. And that is the thing that I think people here are missing, is the opportunity to make connections with these people, with the people that you see on Twitter and you consider your heroes. They're just human beings like you, and they are happy to talk to you. They will be your friends if you go over there and actually just make an effort to meet them. So again, just a couple of conference ideas. Those are some of the bigger ones that you could consider going to. Some of them take submissions for talks as well. So, you know, if you don't want to actually pay to go to the conference itself, that's a way that you can go to the conference for free. And again, don't think you don't have anything to say. And if you want help with coming up with ideas, really happy to help. So go out there and find your people, because they may be different to the people that you expect them to be. So here's what it comes down to. We're all elephants and dassies. The evolution of our work and environment has produced new relationships across all these spheres. We've spoken about all of these relationships between disciplines. We spoke about how disciplines are overlapping now. There are all these overlaps. Disciplines are fuzzy. It's not clear. And that's okay. We need to be all right with that fuzziness. Don't worry about how you define your job so much. Relationships within teams, and about how important that is, how important it is to collaborate and to actually understand the jobs that the other people in your team are doing, how you should learn from the rest of the people in your team. Take the time to understand what they're doing as well, and look out for the gaps. We spoke about relationships across verticals, about how organizations are changing, how silos are becoming permeable, and how important it is for us as UX professionals to actually highlight this for our clients and to make sure that they understand that the work that we do stretches right across the organization and can't be confined to one silo, to one vertical. We spoke about relationships in our local community and how we really need to build a community of practice. We need to come prepared to share, prepared to talk, prepared to be more generous with our ideas and our challenges to one another. We spoke about relationships across borders and how we really need to get out there and become part of the conversation, become part of the global conversation and get involved. So embrace these relationships, because this thing only goes if we collaborate. Erica Hall is the co-founder of Mule Design and the author of Just Enough Research. Some of you might know Mike Montero. He's the other co-founder of Mule Design. Erica spoke at Confab, which is a very big content strategy conference in the US. She spoke at Confab in 2011. And she said something there that it wasn't in any of her slides, but it stuck with me ever since, because I thought it was really profound. She said the end product isn't great content. It's a great thing. Now, she was speaking to an audience of content strategists, but you could sub in many things for content. The end product isn't great interaction. It's a great thing. The end product isn't great design. It's a great thing. The end product isn't great information architecture. It's a great thing. So respect one another's work, embrace the relationships, and let's go out there and make great things. Thank you.
Thank you for the awesome talk, Kerry-Anne. We've got a few minutes before our tea break, so we've got some time for a quick Q&A session with Kerry-Anne. Any takers?
Hi. I was just wondering why you said quite early on SEO is still important in South Africa, whereas you implied that it wasn't as important globally anymore.
Oh, so no, I don't mean that it's not as important globally. I just think that... Shall I? Sound on. I think it's something that's always been emphasized in South Africa, perhaps more than elsewhere. It certainly is still important everywhere. But I think it's something that we've always put a lot of emphasis on. So that's just perhaps my perspective on it. That I've always seen companies being prepared to pay for SEO before anything else, really. Certainly when I was doing more marketing stuff. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't think it's so much the distinction between globally or that it's not important anymore globally. I don't know. Does that answer your question? Oh, well, I think it depends on, maybe we should talk afterwards. It depends on the kind of SEO we're talking about. I mean, SEO is important, but I think it's been overemphasized. Let's put it that way. It's been overemphasized in South Africa. Yes. I think, and it's been seen as, well, as long as we get people to our site, then we're sorted. But that's not enough. It's one piece of it. And it's sort of, maybe it's been something that's been very well sold. It's been an easy sell in a way, whereas everything else has been harder to sell because it's been harder to explain, perhaps. So, and I think that SEO overseas perhaps has matured a little more, whereas here, again, we're a little bit behind. So here it still tends to be the easy sell. whereas overseas it's tended to become more integrated with the rest of the team and more, yeah. That makes sense.